Greetings, Poe fans. Welcome to another edition of Poe Unplugged. I am Carmen Bolden.
And I am Jeannie Smith, and we are
The Poetastic Two.
Come zoom with us into the Unbook Club dedicated to the works of Mr. Edgar Allan Poe.
Good evening, Poe fans and Poe listeners. Welcome back to Poe Unplugged, where we are going to be discussing The Sleeper. Jeannie, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
Oh, my fur is ready to go.
Oh, Lord. Well, we have a special guest with us tonight, author and poet A.A. Rubin, known as also the Surreal Ari. So we're going to let Ari take control and give a little background on himself, as well as start the discussion tonight.
Hi, thanks for having me on, guys.
Yeah.
I know some of you, but not all of you. For those of you who I don't know, nice to meet you. As Carmen said, I am an author. I'm a poet. I write in a wide range of mediums, ranging from formal rhyming poetry to comic books. And I have a new project on BackerKit right now. We're crowdfunding it. It's called The Awful Alphabet. The Awful Alphabet is a picture book for adults. It's the perfect elixir for the ennui which envelops your heart. Our tagline is "Adulting is hard, nourish your inner emo child." And I think there's going to be some giveaways with it, if you back during the program. I'm also a huge fan of Edgar Allan Poe, and I write a lot of Gothic poetry. I write formal poetry to begin with, and I write a lot of Gothic poetry. I've had a few. Oh, I have my other book, Into That Darkness Peering, which was nominated for a Visitor Award last year. I finished first place in the 6 Degrees of Edgar Allan Poe Poet Like Poe competition, and I will be a judge this coming April for the second annual competition. So I will be hopefully reading some of your poetry.
Yes, and Holly and Dr. Jeff are also judges as well. So it's exciting.
I really want to talk about The Sleeper. I'm fascinated by this poem for a number of reasons. One of the reasons, it's a beautiful poem. I think especially in the opening stanzas, some of the most beautiful imagery and description that Poe has in his entire catalog. But I'm also interested in it from the perspective of a writer, because one of the things that's always fascinated me as a writer is, I'm going to paraphrase Kurt Vonnegut here, that we don't know what the good and the bad stuff is. We don't know what the best stuff is. Edgar Allan Poe loved The Sleeper. He thought The Sleeper was his best poem. Now, I'm not saying it's a bad saying the bad stuff, but I was saying I have a quote here that I pulled off of the Edgar Allan Poe Society of Baltimore in a letter that he wrote in 1846. He said, "In the higher qualities of poetry," and he's speaking about The Sleeper, "it is better than The Raven, but there is not one man in a million who could be brought to agree with me in this opinion." And in another list, he listed it among his best poems. So he thought this was his best poem. He recognized that everybody else thought The Raven was the best poem, that the general public did, and that they weren't going to agree with him. But as himself, just looking back at his own poetry, he thought The Sleeper was his best poem. And I thought it'd be interesting to look at why he might think that. Sometimes we're very close to our own material. I read a lot. Harlan Ellison talks a lot about that, if you know, a famous science fiction writer, about we never know. We know if we've written something good, but we never know what's going to hit. We never know what it is that's going to be a hit. Ellison said there's a story he wrote that he researched every name of every demon in the story. Looked it up. He spent like 6 months writing this one short story, and it was nothing. It was published in some journal and no one ever heard from it again. And then he had this other story, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, which is his most anthologized story. He said he wrote that in a night just before he thought, okay, fine. And that turned out to be the one that he's probably most known for. So I wonder, is there something like that going on with this poem? Is there something else? But that was initially what brought me to this poem, in addition to what I find to be the absolutely beautiful language in the first stanza of the poem, especially the opening few lines.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing that I always get is when I read it, I'm like, this is the poetry side of the short story of Premature Burial. In my opinion, that's one and the same. It's like those two go together like bookends
Yeah.
because you look at it from a poetic side and then you look at it from a short story side. Because he personifies her in the story as, being angelic, of course, but also just a picture of being in the tomb with her eyes shut and just, experiencing it and experiencing death. So, I mean, that's the way I interpret it, as a personification of premature burial. So,
Okay. One thing that came to mind for me was, and I kind of dug in to some background on Irene, because that was the original title when he wrote it in 1831. And who was Irene? And I found some interesting things, that she's the Greek personification of peace. And I think it was mentioned in the eapo.org from that same article, Ari. But also just thinking about the sleeper, that allusion to Sleeping Beauty, that origin, and like someone that's not dead but at rest. And so I started digging in, and that some people have looked at that fairy tale coming from, it's Charles Perrault, but it's also like deeper into Byzantine culture and alluding to that Irene connection that way. And so that was where my rabbit hole went.
well, and I mean, it fits perfectly with Poe and his connection to both any type of history, because we've talked about how he always likes to bring up with the Greek and the Roman and that type of the religious behavior along with it. And the sleeper can also, account for, in most religions, especially, that, your soul is just waiting for the rapture type of thing. So you are, asleep and you're waiting for the eternal rest and that kind of thing. And I mean, it's got very I'd say it's close to the most religious aspect I could see as what Poe has written, for me, at least for me. Because as I was reading it, I was picturing it, and I'm like if you've ever been to a funeral and, especially a graveside service, and there's always that calm, even though you're in an open place and you're all, and you feel the calm. It's like even the wind stops blowing,
Mm-hmm.
and you're just silent, and because you're just taking it all in. And especially when you have a preacher or someone who's giving a eulogy or giving um their saying or talking or whatever, you feel it, and it just it gives you this serene feeling, a peaceful, and of a hope. I hate to say it, but yeah, it's like gives you a hope that, you may be sleeping, that there may be something beyond what this is, that it's just a resting spot. And so with the sleeper, as I was reading it, and I immediately interpreted and thought about all the different, funerals. I hate to say it, but all the different funerals that I've been through. And my very first earliest memory when I was 3 was at my grandfather's funeral. And it was during Easter, and it was in the springtime. And I still remember that it was peaceful. But you're 3, you don't understand what death is. So, but it was still like, it still made an impression. So, I mean, that's to me, he still makes an impression no matter what, with his language, with his, you know, imagination, and his touch with whether it be any kind of religion or history or anything. But that's just me.
Yeah.
I completely agree, Jeannie, because when I was reading it, I tend to think, I know we've had conversations before between the religious and the spiritual. I always tend to think that Edgar Allan Poe is religious to me. Maybe it's because I said I went to Catholic high school. I don't know. But I got the same vibe of like this very religious kind of vibe, even with the way like the flowers wilted. I kind of made me think of like a funeral. But I definitely the hope thing, I think more than anything, like that line where he says that like he hopes that Irene will be able to bypass all the ghosts that haunt normal people.
Mhm.
And versus other stories where he's basically telling a story like Annabelle, like, this is how she died and we were separated. This story is more about him focusing on the afterlife and the hope that things maybe are better on the other side once we kind of pass through this plane of existence.
Yeah. Holly, I'm going to add on to what you said. One of the lines, it's in the third to the last stanza. It's the last line. Well, I'm going to read the two. Forever with unopened eye, while the pale sheeted ghosts go by. That
Yeah,
line
that one.
stuck with me
Mm-hmm.
because pale sheeted ghosts implies it's humans with sheets over them. It's like, are these really like people who are dead, or is this closing your eyes because now you can rest from these people who are haunting you in real life? Is kind of what I took from that, going along with what you guys said. I don't know, that sheeted word really stuck out to me. Like, why did he choose that one?
I'm surprised that the name Irene doesn't have an L in it. Almost all of Poe's doomed female characters have an L in their name because Poe thought that the L sound was a sad sound.
Yeah.
Lenore, Annabel Lee, Ulalume, Madeline, Morella, Ligeia. He liked that L sound, and with a
Like,
few exceptions, Berenice and this one,
yeah,
almost every woman has an L in her name.
that's true. That's a really good point.
I also wanted to pick up a little on the religious slash spiritual thing, because to me, more than any other poem that he wrote, um, this one reminds me more of the British Romantic poets who immediately preceded him. Like when you start reading it, it sounds like something Byron could have written. It sound and there's I've always found there to be connections between Poe and the capital R Romantics in that um spiritual and it's more outside of organized religion. It's a spirituality in nature and in creation as the artist and all sorts of other things. But even metrically, like I mean, if you look, like he brought up the comparison with the Raven, and the Raven has this odd meter. It's written in it's tetrameter, but it's a tetramic octameter,
Yeah.
which is an odd. Like this one, for the most part, there's some lines with 9 syllables, but the dominant meter is just a regular iambic tetrameter, um, a much more traditional meter, um, in this particular poem, and it doesn't switch. It switches, it's not consistent throughout, which is typical of Poe, right? The Raven is actually atypical in that way, but it's pretty consistently the dominant meter, which is much more the way that Byron wrote and the way that Blake wrote and the way, and the way that they did. And there's so many echoes of that tradition in it. In for me, just even from a craft perspective. And then with the spirituality, right? It's all spirituality through nature almost as much as it is, not as much inside of the church, but outside of it, right? I mean, he's standing beneath the moon, right? He's out in the water and then the graveyard, right? There's these big, powerful spaces in there, and that the atmospheric elements, I think, are what lends that kind of spiritual mood to it. Not nearly as dark as some of his, it is. I mean, he's in the graveyard and it's the ghosts and all that kind of stuff, but it just it really I mean Byron especially, but Coleridge and Blake and a bunch of the other ones who were around, writing either just before Poe, a little bit before Poe, and who would have been some of like he definitely would have been aware and have
Mhm.
read them. And I'm thinking that perhaps comparing some of his work, maybe he thinks that this is more like what was considered by other people to be, like a, if thinking about why that is. But I think it also um, it lends itself to that spirit, that spirituality, but that not organized religion spirituality, the one that comes from the world and from nature and from
Mhm.
being a creator yourself.
Yeah.
Poe is considered an American
Yeah, I'm
romantic
like, yes.
writer. And my students and I are talking about romantic poetry right now, and we've read The
Oh,
Echoing Green and Nutting and Ozymandias. But yes, I was struck with that when I read the poem. So much of romanticism is about emotion, the past, nature,
Yeah,
and he really taps into all of that in this poem. So yes, it is a very romantic with a capital
capital
R
R. Yeah.
Yes.
poem.
Yes. Yeah, and even that very first image, right? Even beyond the poetry, right? If you think of those Caspar David Friedrich paintings and the romantic, right? You have the small figure underneath the big moon, or
Hmm.
that type of thing, and it evokes that kind of image for me as well.
Yeah.
We
We'll
can
add,
even, oh, sorry, go ahead.
say Will added on the chat, Carmen, your theory about the ghost reminded me of a poem I wrote where I imagine the main character who is deceased to look more lifelike than the mourners who I imagine to look like skeletons or close to it. Oh, that's an interesting
Mm.
take on that. Yeah.
Well, I
That's
mean, the veil, most people call the division between life and death like a veil that you're looking on each side. So where the person on the death side looking out would probably, still see themselves as being alive and see those on the other side as being skeletons or what used to be. But bringing up romance, like Dr. Jeff was talking about, that very first line, which I happen to have stuck right there, and the cat's gone. It says at midnight in the month of June. I thought was very romantic because if you think of all the different stories and all the different songs about if you marry in the month of June, you'll be, let's see, how's it go? They had it, it was in The Sound of Music. Come on, can't think. You're a bride all life, all year long, or you're a bride all your life long, or something like that. So, death in the month of June, it's kind of like, well, I mean, your love in June, if you still love in the month of June, you'll love throughout eternity, is kind of how I interpret it.
hmm
Because if you want to go along the same lines of romanticizing it, but,
yeah.
and that's the one thing with Poe and about the spiritualism. I know we've talked about the religious aspect, but I still think more of Poe as being more spiritual than religious, as far as, identifying with one particular organized religion. Like we've had that discussion before.
Yeah.
So, and he, it just is, it's very spiritual because it touches everybody differently. And especially when anyone has any experience with death, because some
Yeah.
people actually picture death as being a romance of
Yeah.
some sort. I mean, there was an actual movie was made, The Nightmare Before Christmas, because in my opinion, that's all about romantic death. I'm just saying. So,
I thought you were
but
talking about Meet Joe Black with Brad Pitt. I was like, yeah, okay.
hell yeah, meet
I do
Joe
love.
Black. Wasn't yeah. I mean, City of Angels, think about it for, Nicolas Cage coming down from, fall of grace so he can fall in love. And I mean, we could go on and on because there's so many things of where people are mixing death, romanticism, spiritualism. I mean, it just fits. And I hate to say it, but and I don't think we're a little cray cray for that. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
We like that thing. We like it. It's a gothic. It's a very much what definition of gothic is as I see it. So
Yeah. And Jeannie, you almost said this like quote. It's like Poe was speaking through you. You kind of paraphrased it. but the like it jumped into my mind and I looked it up just to make sure I was remembering it correctly. The boundaries which divide life from death are at best shadowy and vague. And it really ties into what you just said a minute ago.
Where was that from?
I'll have to look it up because I don't remember it off the top of my head. Because I remember the quote a little bit differently than I just read it. I remembered it. I was thinking the boundaries between life and death are shadowy at best, is what I was thinking, and then I found the actual real quote, and I'll look it up while we're talking. So,
well, I always get thrown in when I think about things Shakespeare's, with Horatio, there's more things between heaven and earth, and I always forget the rest of it.
Yeah.
That's as far as I get, and it's like
there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes.
All right. So Jeannie, Poe was speaking through you bringing up the premature burial because it's from the premature burial.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
I'm totally Poe creeped out in a good way.
Okay, well.
And then Will says that quote is following me around.
Exactly.
And Virginia's here. Yay.
What, Will? Go ahead. Will was going to say something. What was it?
Oh, Will, you're muted.
You're muted back. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. I hear that heaven and earth quote. I've heard it just so many times in different mediums in TV shows and movies.
Mm-hmm.
Someone walking by. I don't know why, but I'm just hearing it all the time these days.
Oh, wow.
Well, and the bad part is unlike Dr. Jeff, most people and me, that I just paraphrased it because I can't ever remember it exactly, but nobody actually gets it right. More than 80% of the time when somebody is reciting it or using it in shows or TV or everything, they either only say it to that the way I paraphrased it, or they just butcher it so bad it's like, yeah, don't say anything at all. Yeah. Like, and hi, Virginia. Woo, woo, woo. She missed my kitty. Oh, you saw the kitty. So, okay. Yeah. I went back to the regular,
It's amazing that your cat lets you pick it up like that.
Yeah.
My cat would scratch my eyes out.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Hers fits the dangle test. But, okay, I have to ask Holly, what is on your shirt? Is that the yin and yang?
Yeah. So, like, like they say you're born in, like, the era you grow up in. So, yeah. 90s here. All right.
I was just kind of, because I'm like, how much more appropriate for what we're talking about with life and death is yin and yang?
It's true.
Okay. So you did it on purpose. I know you.
That is so true. All right. What else did you guys take from the poem?
One other thing that's striking me now, just as I'm looking at it, going back to that comparison that Poe drew with the Raven, right? We had in Midnight in the month of June, right? The Raven, we know is December, right?
So it's the bleak December.
The exact polar opposites of the year, right? It's I mean, it'd be interesting that he that he drew that comparison himself, given that, I mean, if you would go right from month 6 to month 12, it's almost, it's exactly halfway across the year and the different seasons. I mean, when we're talking about, the influence of the Romantic poets, things like that, right? The nature means and the weather, right? And these types of things mean so much, and they, think about the difference between December and June, right? If you were in the bleak December, that's very different than Midnight at the month of June. Just the way that you're imagining it, right? And
absolutely.
And another thing, bringing that up, is most of the time when we think of death, we actually think of December, because we think of the winter months where pretty much everything is dying, so it can be reborn in the spring. But then with June and the death in June, it's like that in itself, he's talking a tragedy, that
Yeah.
something's happening that it's like this shouldn't be happening, because June should be, as you explained when you just said, Ari, that June is a time where it's like life. It's like summer. It's vibrant. It's beautiful.
Green.
And
Yeah.
yeah. But then December is not, I mean, now some people like me, because I like the winter months too, because I love the snow and the ice, and it has its own type of beauty. So, and that's another thing that Poe loves to do. He loves to build the beauty in everything he talks about, whether it be summer, spring, fall, or winter.
Mm-hmm. Well, and something else I'm gonna tag on to what Ari said with the June to December and Jeannie as well is thinking about, so he originally wrote this in 1831. He adapted it a couple more times, like in 1836, 1837. His final few little things he changed was in 1849. The Raven was published in 1845. And I may be like right now I'm very entrenched in Romeo and Juliet at school. And so we keep talking about light and dark a lot, the sun, the moon, and things like that. And so it's almost like the sleeper and the Raven might have that light to dark, beginning to end, alpha omega tie to it. You kind of wonder, I mean, are you bringing this point up with that? It makes me wonder, did Poe really think about that when he wrote the Raven, or is it just coincidental?
Yeah, going back to how we were saying how this poem kind of had like a vibe of hope to it, and then at the end of the Raven, he's kind of laying there on the floor with no hope.
Right.
So that kind of has the opposite kind of feel to the ending as well.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that's why he had such a high opinion of it, right? Because he could
Yeah.
still deal with the death, right? And then this one, he's able to bring it back around to that message of hope, which is,
Mm-hmm.
not present in many of his poems, but
Yeah.
he's able, some of them, but he is able to bring it back there.
Yeah. And I looked at the original version. I do like the newer version from 36, 37. And 31, it would have been right after he was out of West Point. And so he was still very young when he wrote this. And so just thinking about just the power he had in poetry, even as young as he was, because this is probably of his earlier poems, it's one of the best ones, in my opinion.
And one other thing is in the opening, and it's just we would think of it as almost like a cinematic,
Yeah.
like long shot pen, and like way before that, and something that I often brought up when I taught Dickens, but I noticed it here as well that these some in the 19th century are able to get the cinematic, like we have at midnight in the month of June, I stand beneath the mystic moon, right? Your moon, you're in the sky, right? An opiate vapor dewy dim exhales from out her golden rims, softly dripping drop by drop upon the quiet mountaintop. We're moving downwards. We're still high because we're dripping down from the moon to
Yeah.
the mountain, but the mountain is still above us, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, steals drowsily and musically into the universal valley. So we still have that downward movement from the mountaintop now down into the valley. The rosemary nods upon the grave, and now we're below the ground, right? We've moved from the sky to the mountain, to the valley is, very ground, and then below the ground to the grave. And it's like you could see, where he's drawing your eye in the scene.
Yeah.
And even to do that before there was, really film and penning effects like this, right? It's just I think it's just it's a brilliant beginning of the way that he brings you in like that, and then the focus is going to go in further as I mean, not going to be the whole thing is pretty long, but going into the sleeper to herself, right, and then focusing in on it, right? So you have that wide that sky, you move down, you're still in the landscape, you're focused on the grave, and then you go in and you see the sleeper herself, and the way he moves your eye through the poem or moves the reader or listener even to the through the setting as he's getting you to drawing you into the world and putting you in. It's like you're almost following his eye, as
Yeah.
well, right? He might be looking up and then he's, looking through it. And it's really, I think, one of the most effective techniques in this poem, the way that he, it's just it might not have that driving pathos that's in some of his other poetry, but
Yeah.
it's in terms of this much quieter technique, but I think just as effective.
I agree. And when you started talking about that, starting from the mountain, going down into the valley where the sleeper lies, it kind of made me think of, and lo, I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, is what really just like popped in my head when you were reading that and saying that.
Me too.
I mean, it ties in. It really does. And it going back to those religious connotations and things.
And then those psalms are actually, I know I don't want to get into anyone's religious thing, but the psalms are very similar to other Near Eastern psalms. Like if you look at
Yeah.
Egyptian psalms and you look at Mesopotamian psalms around the same era, that they're very old, the very old themes
Yes.
that go back almost to the beginning of people writing literature, and these ideas of, you know, going into the, you know, that there's going up and then going down, into the earth. And if we think of many conceptions of death and hell, as it was underground, um,
Mhm.
where we know a lot of the Western religions, right? And then Poe definitely plays on that throughout his poem, throughout his entire catalog, because that's who his audience is, and that's how he was brought up, and what time period it is. But they're part of what works about them is it's like almost, it's like a Campbell, like a Joseph Campbell type thing, where it's almost just like a universal thing, almost universal thing, where these themes are much older than any one particular religion, right? And the reason why each of us may be able to see reflections of our own thing, and then I think that's part of why Poe holds such an appeal, is that he's able to strike these more universal tropes that transcend a particular tradition, or
Yeah.
a particular tradition or a particular religion.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. And Jeff, thank you for sharing your list of what you're reading with your students, because that's kind of cool to kind of create a little reading list to go along and complement what we're reading. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we read. Are you doing any Coleridge?
No,
No.
those are the only
Those are the only
romantic
ones.
type poems that I'm doing, and then I'm going to go into late 19th and 20th century.
Come on.
And I did do some Mary Hatoun, or Mary Khatun, she
Mhm.
says her name both ways, ghazal love poems from the Middle East, as well as the Ballad of Mulan from
Oh,
China
nice.
or Mongolia.
Nice.
That
Hey, I got
is.
really excited when I saw you had Ozymandias on there.
Yeah.
And I was like, woohoo! It's one of my faves, one of my faves. I was like, I remember those. It makes me want to just, audit your class, because I don't have anything else to do. But
Exactly. Oh, I know. Well, Virginia, you had to jump in late and had some technology
Yes.
problems, but thankfully you're here. So do you want to add into the discussion, because you missed part of what we were talking about at the
I
beginning?
know. I'm so upset. There was a really bad crash on my way
Oh,
home,
no.
so that kind of put things behind. But
Yeah.
yes, I guess just kind of, okay, I'm now Sam's cats. Okay. I can sit more comfortably now, instead of being a piece of furniture myself. The things that I love about this particular poem, it like everybody has said that I have heard, or at least what I have heard some people say tonight, is that it is one of his earlier poems, obviously, yes. And it's one that should be more known, because it
Yes.
is such an incredible poem. And So I like to read things and then I like to hear other people read it because I want to hear like their take on it. And as someone who used to oral interpretation for forensics, it always fascinates me how almost every single person who reads poetry of Poe's, it's always so dark and dreary and dramatic. Certain poems, yes, need that. Others, I don't think so much. And this is one of those ones that when I listened to a few people read it, I was like, oh, what? I mean, it was good, but it wasn't needed. And to me, this is just one of those, as Holly said, it is so full of hope, which is completely opposite, which we have talked about when we did The Raven, that it's like, oh, it's gone. But here, it's very full of life.
Yeah.
Even though he's talking about someone, like, you're actually not sure if he's really dead, because I'm not sure she's really dead. And there's a line. So this is gonna sound goofy, but this is probably my favorite line in this poem. And it says, like, ghosts and shadows, it says that o'er the floor and down the hall, like ghosts and shadows rise and fall. And that line to me speaks breath. It's an image of breathing. And I don't know why I love that, but that whole, I mean, there's that whole stanza there, and it's just like, breathing. Maybe.
Yeah.
And I love that. It's just so beautiful to me.
Yeah, it is. And I hadn't thought about that with the rise and fall, but that does kind of hint around it, breathing.
Because it in the lines before, he's talking about the chamber and how the wind is blowing in and out and the curtains are moving, and then the door, the hinges are, and it just goes, and you're just like, the entire room is breathing.
Yeah.
She may not be, but that entire room has life.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I find that beautiful.
It is. This whole poem is beautiful. And it's one, like Virginia, you said, that it should be more well known. And I always forget about it. And that's why, like, Ari, I'm so glad you chose this one for us to read tonight, because I forget how amazing of a poem it is. And that just the first two lines hook me in, and I just want to keep reading, and I want to read it aloud. And I may have to read this with my students. And I had to actually, like, shift Poe a little bit further down the 9 weeks, and I'm not happy I had to do it, but it's all good. It's just some things came up with our schedule that we had to rearrange, and I'm like, we are still doing Poe, and they're like, okay. So
No, it's interesting what you said, Virginia, because going back to, we were talking about the bells as my favorite. It's one thing that I, when I was listening, right, only the end of that poem needs to be read with the, the harsh Gothic, like I've heard, like, many readings where they try to read the whole thing like that. At the beginning of the poem that's the point of the poem. Is the beginning of the poem isn't like that. And I said, Basil Rath, if you're looking for someone, Basil Rathbone is amazing. I don't know if he's done The Sleeper, but he really gets those shifts in some of the poems, whereas some of the other readers, because I think it's because they generally choose horror movie icons to do it, and that's their whole thing, not to call any of them out or anything like that, but it's there's a way, there's a way to read it, and and he's incredible. He's incredible at that. And I used this poem. I taught a Poe workshop back in October, just locally here on Long Island. We got a old Quaker we rented out an old Quaker meeting house from like built in the 1700s, and you had the cemetery outside and the light coming in. It was the perfect venue, and we read a few poems. We read a few poems by Poe, and then we did a workshop where people, then had to try to write something like Poe, and then there was an open mic at the end. And I remember we remember picking out The Sleeper as one of the poems that we did, and just to show the range a little bit, So, of course, people they know The Raven, and they know Annabel Lee, and they know but they, it's like what we were talking about a few weeks ago, when we were on that show together, Carmen and Jeannie, when the range in the short stories with the
Yeah.
it's not all what he's known for. It's not all that dark gothic, there's satire, there's detective stories, there's all sorts of stuff. And while there isn't quite as much range in the poetry, because it is all, meter traditional, and even in this one, you'd say there's plenty of gothic, things going on. I mean, we have it's still it's just a range within his work that I don't think enough people are aware of.
I agree. Yeah, because
Yep.
every time I meet someone, it's, oh, my favorite story is, and it's usually The Telltale Heart, Fall of the House of Usher, Cask of Amontillado. And I love them all. I love everything. But it's like, did you know? And I will say it's really kind of funny, because when my husband and I travel, he is no stranger to a wall to talk to, and which is a very good quality for him and I, balanced as we are. But whenever we do meet someone, he'll say, oh, and by the way, she does a podcast. And did you know that Poe wrote this, and it has nothing to do with horror? And so he's kind of my, Jeannie, I say he's our marketing techno nerd, but at the same, in a very good way. But it's like, we love educating people that Poe is more than just the man of horror, the man of death.
Well, and the thing about it is that along with Poe's stories, poems, his one book, his nonfiction novel, his desires and everything, and what he does, even as a critic, he is a renaissance. We've said this many times before. He is the epitome of a renaissance. And not only that, but his writing is very much par for life. Everybody has difference. We all don't go through life on one keel. We don't just experience one thing. Like, we don't experience just, complete tragedy. At least I hope we don't. I mean, we all have ups, we have downs, we have ins, we have outs, we have love, we have death, we have hope, we have despair, we have all those things. And that's what he is. And when people, and I don't want to really say this because, being a retired teacher, but in some instances, I think education pigeonholes it to the point to where if the teacher doesn't bring it across correctly when they're talking about it, or they don't, they just go through the motion of like, I'm teaching this, whatever. But at the same time, it can be the point of they can cause someone not to want to enjoy it, or someone not want to read more about it. And I've seen it so many times, and it does break my heart, especially being an English teacher at heart. But the one thing is, when I can have a student that I haven't had in like 6 or 7 years, who will make a point of coming up to me, and this actually happened to me, and she told me flat out that I was the reason that she started reading, that she hated reading so much. And I only had this child for 6 weeks. I didn't even remember who she was. And I was like, okay. But it was like, she understood my passion for what I was doing and what I was reading. And I was, one of the things is I would tell people, and not everybody are readers. My dad was not a reader. He had like a 5th grade education. He was not a reader. In the newspaper was the thing that he would only read in the Bible. Okay, not that there's anything wrong with those two things. I'm just saying. But he was not a reader. But my mom, she would read anything and everything that she could get her hands on. So a lot of it has to do with passion. A lot of it has to do with influence. And especially at a young age, you can either make, or I hate to say, break a person from wanting to read and wanting to learn. And so many people, and I'm going to use the word again, pigeonhole Poe to this particular genre of like gothic horror. It's like, you got to read it like at midnight in the month of June. I stand beneath the mystic moon.
That's almost exactly what it sounded like too. And I was like, oh my God.
Gina, you sound like you're trying to be a heavy metal cover.
It's like when the whole thing of Screamo came out. I'm like, and that's kind of like what Poe, when people will try to read Poe and try to put such darkness to it, and I'm like, stop. Just read it and then experience it. That's the one thing. Whatever you experience, that's you. That's not whoever's reading it. I'm just saying. Okay. All right, now who's next? I need to go back.
I believe Mark Dawidziak told us that, if someone had asked Poe what he did or who he was, he would not have said, "I'm a horror writer." That really didn't even exist back then. That was not really a genre. He wouldn't have said, "I'm a critic, I'm a satirist, I write mystery stories, I write fantasy stories." He would have said, "I am a poet."
Yeah.
That's what he thought of himself as.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we said like so many things around that time, right? This divide between genre fiction and literary fiction is a relatively recent thing. And like, another one of my favorite writers, Tolkien, who was the reason why I wanted to become a writer. He used to, in a way, like if you read Tolkien was an academic before he was a writer, basically a linguist and a professor, at Oxford. But one of the things that if you look at the stuff he was writing with C.S. Lewis, part of their program was to go against this thing that really started with the modernists. Like they were really not happy with the James Joyce and Virginia Woolf types and the way that, you write your book and before you release it to the public, you send it to the university professors to get a criticism about your book going before. Right. So this is very a modern, modernist thing. But, he was, and then things like, we say, oh, Poe started all these genres. It's like you could say Tolkien started a genre. It wasn't a thing. You were a writer. Charles Dickens could write this really like this realistic, social criticism, and then he could write like, A Christmas Carol with ghosts, and no one would bat an eye, right? You look at like something like Wuthering Heights, no one's like, Wuthering Heights, if it was written today, would be shelved, over with Stephen King and over there in the back of the bookstore on the horror shelf, right? And it's, with all the paranormal romance, and it would be like not in the serious literature section, like they'd have the section literary fiction, that wasn't a thing, right? I mean, one of Poe's favorite writers, one of the ways, like when he wrote his criticism of Nathaniel Hawthorne, right? And he was writing in praise of the short story, right? If you look at Nathaniel Hawthorne's short stories, and then like Young Goodman Brown or Rappaccini's Daughter, or he, like Poe, was branching into those areas as well. That there was this Gothic element to the literature at the time. You weren't writing in a genre. You were writing, and some
Mhm.
stories were like that, and that was perfectly fine. Like, you go back to the Shakespeare quote that we went into, more things in heaven and earth that are dreamed from your philosophy, right? It starts with a ghost,
Mhm.
right? And it's
Mhm.
a really scary Gothic ghost, right? It's repeating things 3 times, it's bursting forth from the cerements, it fades when right, that there's all sorts of, remember me, remember me, remember me. Like, it repeats itself. It always speaks in threes. There's all, you know, there's Gothic element, and it's not just there, right? There's the same thing, right? What's he afraid of is that the ghost is going to lead him, like in King Lear, lead him off the edge of a cliff or so, you the Macbeth, you have the witches, and you go back
Mhm.
earlier than that, right? But think about all of the Greek and Roman literature with all the fantastical elements involved in journeys to the right? All the epics have journeys to the underworld, and you know,
Mhm.
um, that's the thing, right? This wasn't a division
Yeah.
until the 20th century. It wasn't a division. You wouldn't say I'm a horror writer, I'm a science fiction writer,
Yeah.
and you know, it's unfortunate, and maybe it's because I spent too many time to get too many rejection letters for things from speculative magazines that say, "Oh, this is too literary," and too many from literary magazines that said this is too speculative, and you go around and around in a circle. So I'm like, okay, now what am I, but um,
Oh,
it's something that's always, it's something that that I talk about a lot, and that I think of a lot, that relates to Poe also. Just
yeah, it
Well,
definitely
and
does.
the labeling of things is always the problem, I think, that's come about with, like you're talking about, the different genres, because there was so much coming out that they had to figure out where to put it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's like, if you think of Agatha Christie, no one thinks of Agatha Christie other than just a mystery writer,
Hmm.
Mhm.
but so many elements of what she writes can be more than just a mystery.
Yeah.
I mean, Murder on the Orient Express, yes, she talks about murder, but just that whole story is chock full of of tragedy, of a mystery in itself, like the detective and forensics and all that kind of stuff. So you can't really place one label on some writers, because if you do, then you're missing out on a lot of stuff that they have to offer. And I think that's what Edgar's problem is people think of him just as horror or a poet. And it's like, no, that's not everything that he is.
Yeah. And I was
Mhm.
gonna say, Jeannie, you mentioned Agatha Christie.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at it right now, and I've had this since I was about 14 years old. It is a hardback collection of her poems that she
Uh-huh.
wrote.
Yeah.
And it's a small little book, and I haven't pulled it out in years, but I toyed with, do I want to keep it? I have a hard time getting rid of books, and so it's one I've kept because it means something. But you wouldn't think she wrote any poetry, but she did.
No. And some people that that was their lifeline. I mean, that's how they made their living, and that's all they could do, was they needed to write, and if that was what was selling at the time, that's what they were writing.
Mhm.
So, and like you said, Agatha Christie, she was selling her mysteries, but hey, she was also a poet. Everything else. So it could just be that sometimes I'm going to say it. I mean, hold on to your hats, people. Sometimes profit actually, exceeds over fulfillment.
Yeah.
So,
Robert E. Howard wrote
Shocker.
poetry too.
Who did,
who,
Jeff?
Robert E. Howard wrote poetry.
mm-hmm,
Okay.
yeah. So it's sad, and just everybody just needs to their make decisions of having all the facts, and as the old saying goes,
Yeah.
make your decisions based on the whole, not on the just the little bits and pieces. because you can't fulfill a puzzle if you don't have all the pieces.
Very true. Well,
Okay, now we're venturing into philosophy here. Let's get out. Get out.
well, and I was
Time
gonna
to
say,
reel it in.
and
Yeah.
yes, it is probably about that time to reel it in. One thing that I was a little surprised we didn't kind of overly mention was just the romantic theme of, the quote, "A death of beautiful woman is the most poetical thing in the world." And this poem definitely has that nature. But when you do think about what Virginia said of the life in it, is it really also the life of a beautiful woman is the most poetical thing in the world? I mean, it just makes you think a little bit differently than just going to the death part of it. So,
And it's also the idea, right, that for the people who go on living, right,
Yeah.
because he is the speaker of the poem is apart from the scene.
mhm,
He's not among the people going in and out of the sepulcher. He's not among the
right.
ghosts. He's removed. He's
Mhm,
looking at it from afar, and
yeah,
and it's kind of a metaphor for that, for the whole experience of going on after a loss, right? Where you're alive and you have this memory of the person, right? Maybe this
yeah,
idealized memory of the person. And but there's a separation. There's a part where
yeah.
you can't go there. You can't go where they are.
Yeah. And that to me ties into almost even survivor's guilt too, of, they passed on, I'm still here, I feel guilty from it.
I'm surprised Poe didn't actually write something that all about guilt. Because I
It's
mean,
helped a heart.
But yeah.
well, I was thinking more along his guilt.
Oh,
His guilt of being left behind and the loss of all these women in his life. I mean, yes, he brings out how the beauty of it and how he is suffering from it. But in all honesty, did he actually just write something of where he himself was just suffering from survivor's guilt? I mean, you could take bits and pieces from all his works and try to see a little bit of it in there, but at the same time it's like, where is that poem, or where is that story where it's just where you're going, why, why am I left behind? Why am I the one still here? I mean, not like he could write it after he died, but I'm just saying.
very true.
Right.
Well, I think it seems like I think we have tied all of this up, and maybe it's time for all of us to not what Poe wrote about the sleeper, but it's close to time for bed. But Ari, thank you so much for joining us
Thank you.
and being our special guest. So
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm
yeah,
going to try
thank
to
you.
join again. Um, the often it's the time when I'm putting my kids to bed, which is why I have not been able to join in the past. But
yeah,
it's 8 o'clock on the East Coast. That's actually
Yep.
yeah.
that time. But I will try. I will try to join again.
Yeah,
And,
definitely so. We'll just include you in the group,
yeah,
and
and
that
it was
way if you
fun.
can jump in, even
Yeah.
if you're late, it's all good. And let's see, Dr. Jeff says, thank you, Ari. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Happy springtime. I'll see you here on Zoom 4 weeks from tonight. Yes, absolutely.
Cool. And
And
I'm gonna put the Backer Kit campaign one more time. I know that
okay.
people were talking. There might not have been enough time, but if you want to
Yeah,
check it out, then please do check it out.
absolutely.
We're really excited about that project.
Yeah. And if you've seen on social media some of the pictures from it, it is just, it's delightful. I can't wait to see it, the whole thing in person.
It was I didn't say this before, but speaking of my kids, during the pandemic when I was home with my son, I would do these little construction paper projects with him, like A is for apple, whatever, B is for butterfly, whatever, right? Just so that he wouldn't be falling behind, because he wasn't going to have as much preschool as my daughter had, who was 10, and who was in school when they did not have parental leave in the New York Department of Education until they did once he was born. They didn't when she was born. It was the new contract. But I didn't want him falling behind, and I put him in, and it's the greatest time. I love being with him, but everyone has a bad day. And I posted like something like, "Oh, I wanted to be constructive." I was like, "I want to do E is for entropy today," and it's like, but one of the people who commented was actually one of my daughter's former preschool teachers, who's an amazing illustrator, and she's like, "Oh, you should do an alphabet book, like an alphabet." And I said, "You know what? I'll write it, but you have to be the one to illustrate it." So that's how this project started. We started it 2 years ago. Now it's
so cool.
coming out now.
So cool. Yay. Well, next month we are going to have Mark DeWidziak back, and Chris Sempner is going to join us, and we're going to dive into the mystery surrounding Poe's death. And I think Leila, did you suggest this, or was it Keith? You two
it wasn't
both
me.
Okay,
No.
it was Keith. You guys had some great suggestions that we took, and
Yeah, I suggested
filtered.
Pym. Yeah.
Yes,
Arthur
that's right.
Gordon Pym,
Yes,
when I
for
suggested.
May. And so, yeah, thank you for that.
You're
And so,
welcome.
yeah, so definitely be prepared with your conspiracy theories around Poe's death. And there's so many of them. And so I can't wait to discuss this. So it's going to be great.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you guys. And we will see you next month.
Yep.